Welcome to Shadow of Truth, and today is Thursday, October the 27th, 2016, and your hosts are Rory Hall from thedailycoin.org and Dave Kranzler from investmentresearchdynamics.com, and this is our Thursday update. Thank you all for being here.
Silver was the original monetary metal before gold.
Yes.
And we're talking 5,000 years. I mean, central banks, I don't know if Rome really had a central bank. They had a fractionalized banking system. But, you know, I don't, what he's talking about isn't anything new. I've been saying for years that, silver's poor man's gold. Really what he's just saying is silver's poor man's gold. Gold's too expensive for most people, so you go and buy silver, and silver has fungibility.
Yes.
Because it's more divisible, per ounce than gold is, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, and Chris Duane made the argument, or he's made the argument for years that, a 10th ounce of silver, I mean, he's proven this, a 10th ounce of silver is what the Roman soldiers were paid for a day's labor. And he's shown that, throughout the world, even today, that it's pretty darn close to that same amount. I mean,
here's an even more interesting thing. If you take a pre-64 dime and you value the silver content because it's 90% silver, okay, in 1963, gasoline cost about 10 cents a gallon.
Right.
All right. Today, you can almost buy a gallon of gas with the amount of silver in a pre-64 silver dime.
Yep.
So sure. I mean, that tells you right there.
It's still about the same money.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. Well, and I didn't read the article, but I guess Gold Corp put out an article that talked about how gold has held its value through the ages, which is true. I mean, it's, essentially an ounce of gold now will buy the same amount that an ounce of gold would have bought in the 1930s. Because in the 1930s, gold was worth $35 an ounce.
Exactly. And the only difference today is inflation.
Right.
I mean, that's really the only difference. And
right.
Gold, and obviously gold has done its job quite well over, the past 85 years and keeping and holding its value against inflation, because that's the whole reason for owning gold, is to protect your wealth against the ravages of inflation, right? I mean, isn't that one of the main reasons?
Yeah. So, I mean, this idea that, silver is going to be monetized by the masses. Well, yeah. I mean, it's just another fancy way of saying, yeah, silver is poor man's gold.
Well, but he seems to believe that it's going to be done at the central bank level, which I don't know that central banks have that much longer of a shelf life.
You know what? I don't even know that that's necessary to introduce into the equation. Again, the central banks unloaded silver in the 60s. Part of it was to help keep the price down, because when Lyndon Johnson demonetized silver, they had to do something to help control the price, to keep the price from exploding. I mean, the same thing with gold. Gold was heavily manipulated in the 60s, only they used physical. And that was the central banks unloading it to try and keep the price down. The same thing happened with silver. I don't know that the central banks are going to stockpile silver, because it's with today's rate of inflation, there's not enough silver. Silver is way more scarce than gold.
Yes.
And so there's not enough silver in the world to back currency. You need both gold and silver. So what I've always thought is that your gold would be your large units of wealth preservation, and your silver would be your more divisible units that would help you have fungibility. Well, you can also create fungibility with gold using the type of software that gold money, or formerly known as BitGold, uses.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I personally, I love the fractional gold. I mean, for various reasons. I mean, it's, something that's obtainable that I can go and get. And since most of the fractional gold that's available on the free market is recognized worldwide by just about anybody because the vast majority of it is has been produced by one government or another. I mean, it's so there's already fractional gold out there. Fits the criteria of it being fungible. I can take a Mexican 2 peso piece of gold that's equivalent to currently about 3.5 ounces of silver.
The problem I have with the fractional gold coins is their premium to spot.
The premium is high.
Yeah, and part of that reason the premium's high is, again, scarcity value, but also, it allows someone who doesn't have enough to buy an ounce of gold to buy a tenth of an ounce or a 20th of an ounce. I've got a couple 1/20th of an ounce Chinese pandas, and they're really cool coins, and I just have them just for the heck of it. But the premiums on them are enormous. So again, I think silver coins serve a better function of fungibility than the fractional gold coins, just because the premiums aren't going to be as high. Well, eventually, we'll see very high premiums on all of this stuff, because they're just going to, after the central banks go through their next round of money printing, there's just going to be so much paper currency out there that people are going to be throwing their money at the precious metals to get a hold of it, because they'll see that it's holding its value. I mean, it's just like during the Weimar period in Germany, people, as the storyline goes, you'd go into a restaurant and have a bottle of wine with your dinner, and by the time you got done with dinner, the empty bottle was worth more than what you paid for the bottle with the wine in it. But seriously, I mean, that's not too far from the truth. I mean, that's how quickly the prices were going up, because they were printing so much money. And so that's kind of the same concept here with silver coins. People are going to start chasing after them and paying huge premiums just to get a hold of them, because once you have it, it holds its value against the depreciating currency.
Right. I mean, just like, Chris Duane has proven, just like what you were talking about a minute ago. I mean, when you start looking at, 2,000 years worth of history and nothing has changed, then that ought to tell you right there everything you need to know. I mean, if I can take a tenth of an ounce of silver or 10 cents, a U.S. dime, pre-64, and purchase the exact same product that I could in 1963 today, well, there you go.
Right, and we get to a point. That's part of the reason why the 90% bags of silver carry a premium on them, because it's fungibility. Because at some point, merchants will start accepting those, because that'll be a way for them to get their hands on precious metals. They'll start accepting those at their market value, not their face value.
Right.
So you'll go into, and it's probably not going to be Walmart and King Soopers and Kroger and Costco, but you go into more like local retailers and pull out a pre-64 quarter, and they'll give you value based on the amount of silver in that quarter versus just saying it's only worth 25 cents.
Exactly. And the premiums on the 90% coin, that's a very, very new phenomenon, because when I first got into silver, which was 7 years ago, 8 years ago, there was no premium on it. And that was one of the first coins that I acquired, were some half dollars. And it was there was absolutely no premium. I mean,
dude, when I started doing this in 2001, the 90% bags traded at a discount to spot. Austrian Philharmonic 1 ounce gold coins basically traded at spot, and then the gold eagles were like, $5 or $10 over spot.
Wow. My, how things have changed.
Yes, and actually, Cougarans traded at a discount, because I don't know, how much, a lot of people don't know this, but a Cougar and is only about 90% gold. I mean, it's an ounce of gold in the coin. It's only about 90%. I forget what the exact percentage is, but 90, 91, whatever. And those would trade at a slight discount to spot.
Because they were only 90%?
Because it was only 90%. Yeah, 90% purity.
But it's still there's still an ounce of gold, though, right?
Yeah, there's an ounce of gold in the coin. In the spirit of keeping these podcasts a lot shorter, I just wanted to turn really quickly. Tesla reported yesterday, and their stock jumped up. Because they went from reporting non-GAAP numbers to GAAP numbers, and I went through the numbers sort of on a cursory basis because I knew, Tesla. The debate for me internally is which company is a bigger fraud, Amazon or Tesla. And I went through and just without even really digging deep into it, I found three sources of where they either incurred fraud in the actual reporting of the numbers, or they used highly deceptive accounting in order to report results that are essentially fraudulent. So, and I wrote a blog post about that. For instance, they make a big deal at, there's a thing where Tesla essentially guarantees the residual value on the leases of these things. So they do it to generate sales. So you lease a car from Tesla, and Tesla guarantees the back end value of it. And we don't know what the back end value on these cars are going to be. It's probably going to be a lot lower than the amount that Tesla guarantees. But the market doesn't care about that because the stock keeps going up. And so one of the things that Elon Musk made a big deal out of was that, the residual lease risk exposure in the third quarter was only 32% of deliveries, down from 36% in Q2. Now, I don't know exactly how he's measuring it because that in and of itself is highly subjective. But you can actually fact check his statement by going to the balance sheet, and there's an item on the liability side called deferred revenue. And that's the amount of revenue that Tesla cannot recognize as part of their sale. So when they engage in a lease, they recognize most of the value of that car as revenue, but then the part that they guarantee on the back end is deferred revenue. So they have to hold that back. And the amount of deferred revenue as a percentage of total revenue in the third quarter soared to 61%. Versus 44% in Q2. So what that tells you is that, they generated a lot of sales in the third quarter, but they also generated a lot of residual lease risk in the third quarter. And yet he's out here saying, our residual lease risk was 32% of deliveries versus 36%. So that was just one example of where it was just glaring fraud for anyone who bothered to go beyond the headline numbers, which Wall Street analysts don't, and neither do most professional investors, quote unquote professional investors.
Well, you said that they stopped using the non-GAAP, or said another way, fraudulent accounting, and started using more accepted accounting practices. I mean, that right there is going to expose what a fraud that it is, right?
Well, but here's the thing. First of all, GAAP has a lot of leeway in it for a lot of gray area where these companies exploit and stretch it to the limits. All they did was, non-GAAP is, they didn't exclude certain expenses. That's usually where the big difference is between GAAP and non-GAAP is companies say, oh, well, on a non-GAAP basis, if we don't include the expense of paying our employees stock, well, then this is what, we add that number back into our numbers, and this is what our non-GAAP earnings are. Well, it really, whether it's GAAP or non-GAAP is kind of irrelevant. Essentially, what I just described there with the deferred revenue is an area within GAAP accounting that he committed fraud with, or it'll eventually come out that he was reporting fraudulent numbers. So there's plenty of room within GAAP to commit fraud. I mean, Amazon, I've dissected Amazon 20 different ways and written about that, to demonstrate that. So But the market gives him credit because now he says, "Oh, these are GAAP numbers, not non-GAAP," and that's a bunch of BS. So,
we were using fraud, but now we're using the legalized fraud.
right, and the tail of the tape is just follow the money. In the last 12 months, insiders unloaded over 4 million shares worth close to $1 billion worth of stock. And one insider bought a whopping 1,300 shares. So that tells you, the insiders are jumping ship they're voting with their wallet. They're like, we're getting out of this thing.
Wow. That's incredible. 4
Yeah,
million shares
yeah.
just from
So
the insiders. Man.
unfortunately, Tesla is like Enron. It's one of these fraud stocks that won't be revealed as a fraud until it runs out of cash. And the market keeps giving it cash because it buys into the BS that he's peddling. And one of these days you're going to wake up and Tesla's stock's going to be down 80%, and you're going to have a big position in it in your fund, and you're going to be like, "Whoa, what happened?"
What's going to happen is that you're going to wake up broke,
Right.
which is no good.
Right. And I
Which is
even
why you need
point
to
out,
go get some
the
gold and
shame of
silver.
it all is, the idiotic shareholders who give Tesla are going to get what they deserve. Unfortunately, a lot of these shareholders don't even know they own it because their pension managers own it and their investment advisors own it. And so these guys don't even know what they have. And one of these days they're going to get a phone call. Sorry, your account's way down because of Tesla.
Yeah, that's got to get out of those 401ks, mutual funds.
Absolutely.
Got to get out. Get out
Get
while you
out.
can.
Get out and buy silver.
Get out and buy some silver. That's it. Well, all right, Dave. Well, I guess we've given them enough to chew on for the moment.
I believe so.
Well, all right, buddy. Well, have a good weekend, and I guess we'll pick it up on Monday and see where we stand.
That sounds good to me.